We have been in the book of Daniel, and this is our third week in Daniel. The reason that we are in Daniel is because Daniel is just the perfect book for helping us who face uncertain times live in certain hope. And we've talked about in the last few weeks how times feel uncertain. Things are hard to see where they're going, and it's even harder to see that they're going to turn out good. Yes, I did see Thursday's debate, but there is a sense of peril, of uncertainty in our life as we kind of live in a time that has been fast changing. And so Daniel is this book that takes us through the life and story of the prophet Daniel, who went into exile, who lived in a very foreign land in a very foreign time, and he learned that he had certain hope to face uncertain times. And so we are here to learn the same things that Daniel gives us. So everybody has married a quirky wife, and me no less. My wife has this game. Quirky is a loving term, right? Where is she? Yeah, there she is. She has this favorite game that she likes to play. It's called Zombie Apocalypse Team. She is always wanting to draft her apocalypse team. Yeah, she also saw the debate on Thursday night, so she's trying to figure it out. But anyways, the zombie apocalypse team, it's this idea that when the end of the world comes, who do you want with you? Who's going to give you the tools, the resources, the strengths that you're going to need to make it through, the dystopian end of the world crisis, right? And so obviously you want to pick for your zombie apocalypse team your resourceful person, your problem solver person, your MacGyver type, right? You also want to pick somebody who's probably got some medical knowledge. So Becky always drafts herself on zombie apocalypse team. You want somebody who's strong, who can lift stuff. You want somebody who's strategic, that's a good planner. You want a strong leader. You want all of these different people that have smarts and that have strength that hopefully you can survive the apocalypse, right? And Zombie Apocalypse Team is a great way to kind of reveal to us what we really rely upon in hard times, what we really value when times are tough. And it is so painful that every Zombie Apocalypse Team never drafts a Bible nerd or a pastor. So I apparently am just zombie food. But maybe that's for the best, right? But when we do Zombie Apocalypse Team, what we are really doing is we are surfacing those skill sets and those abilities that we believe we can rely upon, that will take us through crisis. And I think the reason that we are always ready to kind of figure out who would be the best person in these scenarios is that we are familiar with crises, right? Most of us in this room have lived through one crisis or another, crisis that is a personal crisis in your workplace, crisis in our country. And we live in a world that basically you can count on this. Crisis is inevitable. There is another crisis brewing. There is another crisis coming. And so there is a need for us to make sure that we have what we need to rely upon in those crises. The question that I want to pose to us as we get into Daniel chapter 2 today is, when crisis comes, what do you rely upon? When crisis comes, what do you rely upon? Daniel chapter 2 is basically a chapter about facing crisis. And we're going to see in this chapter that there are really three responses on display. There is going to be the one who relies on expertise. There is the one who relies on power. and there is the one who relies upon God. Now, I know that you guys are all great, and you know that the answer is number 3. And so maybe you think, well, I can tune out for the first 2/3 of this sermon because I know where I already am. But I'm going to challenge, and I am going to push on that, to not assume that you are so confidently and completely in box number 3. Because you see, we live in a world that puts very little value on relying upon God. We live in a world that has been committed to a way of thinking called secularism for all of our lifetimes. And secularism is effectively the idea of dividing your religious life from your public life and treating public problems according to the tools and the resources that exist in the public sphere, of which we are trained to keep God out of. You see, secularism teaches us to turn to the world, to turn to self, not to God, for our answers. And so we live in a culture that when crisis happens, we go and try and find the experts. We ask the experts, how are we going to solve this problem? We go and we look for somebody who can lead us, who has a strength and authority and the ability to marshal a large response. We are in a culture that has taught us that the answers that solve the world's problems are expertise and power. And we cannot be swimming in those waters constantly and not recognize that it influences us as well. You see, secularism trains us to minimize God and rely on expertise and power. And I really want to ask you the self-examining question, how do you notice secularism making you more reliant on expertise and power? How have you experienced this kind of indoctrination into expertise and power? This is not something that is a problem out there. You know, we all know about God, and we all know that we're supposed to rely upon God, but you don't have to turn the calendar back very far to recognize that the virus of expertise and power dominating even the church is very much alive. So I want to say a scary word to you. Do you guys remember COVID? Do you guys remember COVID? COVID came and it shocked everybody. And it shocked the experts, and it shocked the people in power, and it shocked the church. Right? In COVID, we saw experts try and solve the problem. We saw people try and gather power around themselves to try and solve the problem. And when it came to the church, we showed the world we rely upon God. Right? Unfortunately, that was not our moment of greatest witness. I love this image that shows the conflict and the divisions and the anger that just boiled up in our church. We fought over masks, we fought over vaccines, we fought over which politicians were going to be the better people to solve this problem. And we turned against each other, and we yelled, and we went to court, and we did all sorts of things to defend our rights and to defend our way of life. We showed that inside the church, there are divisions about relying upon experts and power. And what did not come out very brightly was that we rely upon God. And so this, to me, is a recent example that we have a zombie apocalypse team mentality that is not grounded in reliance upon God in the average Christian life. Here's what I think chapter 2 of Daniel and recent experience tells us. That we will respond to crisis according to what we have learned to rely upon. And see, secularism is teaching us, oh so subtly, to always rely upon expertise and power. And I am here to appeal to you that we must learn to rely upon God if we want to offer this world any hope, and if we want to be grounded in any hope that will go through uncertain times. And so, as obvious as you know where this sermon is going, I want us to spend time to look at these 3 different responses that are here to teach us that God is the only one we can rely upon in crisis. All right? Because we do have a temptation to the first 2. So let us look first in our passage at the one who relies upon expertise. And in this passage, essentially the overview of what happens is Nebuchadnezzar the king has a dream that is strange and that is frightening. And he is very troubled by it. And so he gathers his zombie apocalypse team, his group of experts who can come and who can figure out what his dream is all about. And so in the Babylonian Empire, the people who had the expertise that really mattered were your magicians and your enchanters, your sorcerers, and your Chaldeans. All right, we have different names for our experts today, but in Babylon, these were the people who had the knowledge, who had the books, who had the smarts to deal with these kinds of problems. So look at verse 4 with me. The Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation." Do you hear the confidence of their expertise in that statement? You tell us the dream, and we will, matter of fact, use our expertise, use our learning, use our smarts to tell you what that means. Right? This is our wheelhouse, O king. We have it. So the magicians and the enchanters, they are the people in the culture who are educated. They've read all the books. They've written a few books. They're smart. They're savvy. They're problem solvers. They are the experts of the age. They have been trained for just such a problem as this. I mean, the experts are those people who succeed at life. They've figured it out. They know the right way and the right things to do. They are the people who are confident in their know-how, right? I've learned about this, or I know I can learn about this, and therefore I can solve it. Today, I mean, this is a major path that most of us covet. We want to be the experts. We want to be the people with know-how. We value the problem solvers. In fact, one description of the kind of system that America has is what we call a meritocracy. A meritocracy is a system where the people who have earned the right to be heard get the positions to speak, right? They have done the learning, they have done the research, they have spent their time getting good grades, and therefore they merit the opportunity to lead and to instruct and to communicate what needs to be done, right? And we are all pursuing the top of the meritocracy. And the whole reason that we want to do good in school, that we want to push our kids into higher degrees, that we want to advance ourselves in whatever career we are, that we want to continue to develop our learning is so that we win in the meritocracy, that we have the expertise that is valued. I mean, one of the values of our country is self-reliance. And self-reliance is just another way of describing being an expert at life, being able to take care of yourself. And so we have lived in a culture that has showed meritocracy and self-reliance going far, right? The people who succeed at meritocracy, the people who succeed in self-reliance, they are usually successful people. They are quote-unquote winners. And they represent a lifestyle and a success story. And so expertise is appealing. To rely upon expertise takes us far. And you can go far. You can go a great distance being the expert. It's one of the reasons I've shared in my past that I loved debate in high school. I got into debate, and it was the first place where the person who read the most, who thought the most, who planned the most, won the most. And I loved it. And I was able to advance in debate with great ease. Expertise is an important part of getting things done in the world. But as we look at the situation of the experts in Daniel 2, we recognize that the pursuit and the reliance upon expertise has a fatal flaw. It has a serious problem. Look at verse 10. Verse 10 says, "The Chaldeans answered the king and said, 'There is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand. For no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean.'" What is the problem with expertise? It is this. Expertise is useless against the unknown and the unsolvable, right? King Nebuchadnezzar says, "I don't want to tell you my dream. I want you to tell me the dream that I had." Well, they can't get inside his head. They can't possibly know the information to solve the question. And we can certainly say Nebuchadnezzar is unreasonable. But there are many problems where the variables that we need to solve are unknown and unknowable. And so expertise can't do anything that we don't know anything about. And expertise, no matter how much there is, cannot solve a problem that is unsolvable. What Nebuchadnezzar put in front of these people was an impossible. An impossible cannot be solved. And so the impossible and the unknown still exist in our age. And the experts fear those situations because those situations expertise fails in. Reminds me of the modern story of one of the greatest minds, certainly of our generation, Steve Jobs. You know, Steve Jobs was brilliant. We live in Steve Jobs' world. He created the iPhone, he created the iPad, he created the iMac. He had a genius that we have just never seen before. And he could solve problems with technology and with ways of seeing what the world needs and how the technology can provide that in ways that are incomparable. He was one of the richest men in the world. Smartest, richest, most resourced, most educated, an expert among experts. And yet, he got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. An absolutely unsolvable diagnosis. Yet he did absolutely everything you could imagine. He put all of his money into mapping his own genome. He was able to do things that no one else could do to fight pancreatic cancer. He used all of his resources, all of his network. He was able to call upon the very best in every field. But his expertise could not take him out of the crisis of that diagnosis. And he passed away. You see, expertise is useless against the unknown and the unsolvable. Now, there is also in this passage the one who relies upon power. And that, of course, is Nebuchadnezzar. Who is Nebuchadnezzar? Nebuchadnezzar is one of the greatest military empire-building people in the history of the world. He was a military genius. He conquered more land than had ever been conquered before him. He was a powerful ruler. He was an unquestioned king. He had clear vision. He is your perfect picture of the man of power, greater than anyone before him. His entire life is a testimony to might makes right, that might wins, and he had all of the might. We see that he is a man of power in this passage because he resorts to power again and again. He resorts to rage. He uses his temper to get his way. He uses power plays of threats to get his way. He is a strong man. Look at how he deals with the experts in verse 5. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, "The word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your house shall be laid in ruins." That's a guy who's used to getting his way. Those kinds of threats show that he has learned the power of power, right? He appears invincible, right? And today we learn that the people who have power are the people who are safest, who are the closest to being invincible. If you have money, you are going to be safer than most people. If you have success, you are further from failure. If you have connections, you have a safety net. In politics, we recognize that the person who wins is the person with the power. You see, power in this world is the way everything works. Every single one of us has had a story of seeing the success of relying on power. We know it works. It works a lot of the time. But there is a problem with power. Power is corrupting. Power is corrupting. And we can see the beginnings of the corruption of power in the story of Nebuchadnezzar, even here in chapter 2. The first evidence of corruption that we see is that Nebuchadnezzar is a fearful man. Nebuchadnezzar is a fearful man. Look at verse 1. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. He is losing sleep. He is troubled. He is terrified of what he has dreamed. And he has had this dream of this great statue crumbling to the ground. He doesn't know exactly what it means, but he's like, am I the statue? That's what he's thinking. You see, he is a fearful man. No matter how much power he has this gnawing fear inside of him that it is all going to come crumbling down. That there is a power out there he will not be able to win against. The second corruption that we see him have is that he is mistrustful. Look at verse 9. What does he say to his experts who say, you're going to have to give us something. You're going to have to give us the dream, and then we can tell you what it means. Listen to Nebuchadnezzar's words in verse 9. It says, if you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. You see, Nebuchadnezzar does not trust his experts. He thinks that his experts are just one plot away from pulling the wool over his eyes and participating in some sort of takeover or assassination attempt. He does not trust them. He recognizes that as he has grown in power, he has grown in enemies. And the walls are whispering threats and plots. And he lives with this growing mistrust that people are against me. And then finally, the corruption shows up in the fact that he is becoming reckless. Look at verse 12. Because his experts would not do or could not do what he asked, we're told this: because of this, the king was angry and very furious and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. That is literally cutting off the nose to spite the face, right? He is so drunk on power and so used to getting his way right away that he decides, because his experts could not meet his demand, that he would destroy all the experts. Well, a king that kills all of the people that can tell him what decisions he needs to make is hastening his own doom, right? And so he is reckless and self-destructive. You see, the problem of power is that it is corrupting. We are unable to hold on to it and manage it without it having this corrupting influence upon us of growing us in fear and mistrust and recklessness. You see, what fundamentally we learn here is that reliance on expertise and power cannot escape insecurity. No matter how much expertise and how much power we have, we cannot escape insecurity. I've shared this quote by A.W. Tozer before, but it really needs to be heard again. So A.W. Tozer, a pastor, also probably never drafted for a zombie apocalypse team, wrote these profound words of the human condition when it comes to expertise and power. He says, "There is hardly a man or woman who dares to be just what he or she is without doctoring up the impression. The fear of being found out gnaws like rodents within their hearts. The man of culture is haunted by the fear that he will someday come upon a man more cultured than himself. The learned man fears to meet a man more learned than he. The rich man sweats under the fear that his clothes or his car or his house will sometime be made to look cheap by comparison, and with those of another rich man. So-called society runs by a motivation not higher than this, and the poorer classes on their level are little better." You see, Tozer is describing in a slightly different way this experience of the limits of expertise and power. Do you have experiences of what Tozer describes? Of just that insecurity that maybe someone smarter is in this room. Maybe someone better is in this room. Maybe someone is going to pull a maneuver in this room and I'm going to lose everything. There is a fragility of living on expertise and power. And with those two in mind, and those two given their best demonstration of themselves in Daniel 2, we are relieved to see that those aren't the only two responses, because the third response is in fact the one who relies upon God. And here's where Daniel comes into the story. Daniel is in the exact same crisis. In fact, he is even in a more disadvantaged situation than the experts, because Nebuchadnezzar has sent out this decree of destruction, and Daniel, simply because he is one of the wise men of Babylon, is part of the decree, even though he wasn't in the room where this terrible decision was made. He is purely at the whim of this decree, and he's had no say whatsoever. So Daniel's in this same crisis, but why does he look different? Look again at verses 13 to 16. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon, he declared to Arioch, the king's captain, "Why is the decree of the king so urgent?" Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel, and Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king. Why doesn't Daniel panic? I mean, he is so collected here. He is incredibly vulnerable. And yet, he appears completely secure. How? We are going to see as we look at Daniel's response, the key difference is that God is not on the perimeter of his worldview, of his understanding. God is not on the perimeter, but is actually at the center of his worldview, is at the center of his understanding of the world. And it is because of that he is able to be completely vulnerable, his life to be completely in danger, and yet still manifest a security. Look at the difference in this crisis from Daniel when God is at the center. Daniel shows that in the middle of this crisis, he knows peace. He knows peace. In these verses that we just read, where's the panic? He is calm. He is controlled. He is asking pertinent questions. He is thinking rationally and calmly. Now, he doesn't know what is going to happen. I mean, one of the things that most astounds me in this passage is that Daniel goes in and tells the king, "I'll tell you the interpretation." And this is well before he knows if he's going to have the answer. This is a bold step. But he's like, "I'm going to stop the clock. Tell the king I'm going to be able to give him an answer." And immediately, what nobody else could get, which was time, Daniel has time. And the reason that Daniel has time is because he is calm and he is confident. Why? Why is he able to respond in this way? The reason is clear. It is because he knows who he belongs to. He knows that he does not ultimately belong to Nebuchadnezzar's decree. He knows that he does not ultimately belong to the fraternity of experts. He knows ultimately that he belongs to God. And because he knows who he belongs to, there is in his response a peace which is not on display from anyone else. Can we have peace like this? So when we accept the exchange of secularism, of keep your God away and then you can participate in this sphere of life, we are subtracting ourselves from the ability to deal with crisis with the resources of God's peace. Beloved, we have a far more concrete peace than Daniel knows of. Daniel knows the promises of his God, but we know the Son of God. And what we know from the Son of God are these words: "I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world." You see, we are able to face crises in this world with the peace that Daniel has because we belong to the one who has overcome the world. Yes, there will be tribulation. Yes, there will be decrees of destruction. Yes, there will be crises. But you always belong to the one who has overcome the world. And so, in crisis, those who rely upon God know peace. And it would be a malpractice of preaching not to point you to one of the most well-worn verses, but most important verses for the peace that we have. Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. Paul tells us, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. There are many problems that are going to be unsolvable and unknowable. There will be many power plays that we cannot stand against. All of these will transcend our understanding. But God's peace surpasses all of those, because he guards our hearts and our minds in Christ Jesus. Daniel doesn't only know peace because he knows God and relies upon God. He knows mercy. Look at verses 17 and 18. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. And he told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. I want you just to notice the word then in verse 17. It starts, then Daniel. After he hears all of this, after he knows that destruction has been decreed, Daniel knows what to do. Then Daniel. He knows exactly the next thing that needs to be done in this crisis. Daniel knows what to do because, as we see in these verses, he knows who God is. Who is God? He tells us, the God of heaven. Heaven is much higher than Nebuchadnezzar. And so he knows who God is. God is the God of heaven. And he also knows God's heart. He says, we can go to the God of heaven and we can seek mercy. Why? Because he knows the heart of God is a heart of mercy. You see, it is because he was steeped in the knowledge of who God is before this moment, that when this moment came, he said, I know exactly where to go. I go to the God of heaven, who I know has a heart of mercy. And so they go in prayer. They know to seek mercy because only God's mercy will save from destruction. They know to seek God's mercy because they have lived in God's mercy. Do we know mercy? Ephesians chapter 2, verse 4 and 5. But God, being rich in mercy because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved. You see, the gospel says the decree of destruction has already come. The decree of destruction has already landed. And the reason that the decree of destruction provides no fear to you is because God has shown us mercy. The decree of destruction has passed to his Son, and mercy has passed to us. And so when the decrees of destruction of this world come, we can remember that we have already transferred from the realm of death to life, because we have been made alive with the one who cannot be destroyed, Christ Jesus. The third thing that we see in Daniel that comes from one who relies upon God is that he knows wisdom. Look now at chapter 2, 19 to 23. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's matter. You see, Daniel experiences the power of godly wisdom, because where expertise and power had failed, his turning to God put him in the one who will never fail. Where expertise and power cannot, God can. You see, in his prayer of thanksgiving, he recognizes who his God is. To the God that Daniel knows belongs all wisdom and power. To that God belongs the reign of kings. To him belongs all knowledge. You see, he knows that only God has the knowledge to stop the decree of destruction. So that's where he goes. He goes to the one, the only one, who would have the wisdom to save him. Do we know that we have that wisdom? In Paul's letter to Corinth, his first letter, chapter 1, verses 22 to 25, we hear words that are so similar to the very situation that Daniel is in. He says, "For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs," or we could say power, "and the Greeks seek wisdom," or we could say expertise. "But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men." Here is what we must grasp as we seek to rely upon God, is that the greatest powers in this world do not compare to the power God demonstrated on the cross. That Jesus, dying on the cross, overcame and overthrew all the powers of this world. So that the one who died on the cross represents a power that we cannot possibly comprehend and that the world cannot possibly overcome. In the cross, the experts of all experts were put to foolishness as they watched an instrument of complete shame and death by God's wisdom become an instrument of glory and life. That our God can outsmart the experts and outpower the powerful by the humility of the cross is sure testimony that when you rely upon him, you have all the wisdom and all the power to go through this world and to be welcomed into the next world. Because Christ is our power. Christ is our wisdom. And the final thing that we see in the one who relies upon God, he knows peace, he knows mercy, he knows wisdom. But here is the astounding thing as he lives in exile, as he lives under a decree of destruction, as he lives under the threat of Nebuchadnezzar, yet this one is the one who comes to the center and makes God known. Here is the last thing I want you to dwell upon, the one who relies upon God. Because we rely upon God, we reveal God to others in crisis. Those who rely on their expertise only reveal themselves. Those who rely on power only reveal themselves. But the one who relies upon God, when crisis comes, they become a revealer of God. Look at what happens in verses 27 to 29. Daniel answered the king and said, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or astrologer can show the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days." Do you see what happens because Daniel relies upon God? Where expertise and power moves God to the side, Daniel brings God to the center and proclaims him to those who did not know him. The one who relies upon God makes God known. We looked at this verse last week, but it bears a new emphasis. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 tells us this: "In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy," i.e., be the one who relies upon God, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. Peter is saying, as you live in a secular world, as you live in a godless world, as you live in a world ruled by experts who fail and powerful people who fall, and yet you continue with peace and wisdom, people will ask, what is in you? What is the difference about you? You see, you relying upon God in crisis is perhaps the moment you were created to make God known in a powerful way that crushes the idols of our world. But this only happens if we choose to be those who rely upon God and allow the crisis to show our reliance upon God. Secularism cannot silence the one who knows the salvation of Jesus, right? So let's boil it all down. Are you relying upon God? Daniel was saved from destruction because he put his reliance on God before the crisis came. There will be other things like COVID. Will we be different? Beloved, God provides you his peace, his mercy, his wisdom to face the day of destruction. His peace and his mercy and his wisdom have a name. It's Jesus. Have you made Jesus your rock? Have you placed your life in his hands? Have you said, I rely upon Jesus to take me through this day and every day? Have you called upon his name? Put your trust in him and say with the psalmist, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Amen.